January 17, 1968. Konum Province, Republic of Vietnam. The morning monsoon drips through triple canopy jungle as Private First Class James Jimmy Castellaniano crouches behind a moss-covered log, his heart hammering against his ribs. He's been missing for 8 hours. He's 19 years old. He's a mess hall cook. And right now, through the wall of vegetation 50 meters ahead, he's watching 30 Viet Cong soldiers unload wooden crates into a camouflaged bunker complex. His M16 rifle feels foreign in his hands. In 3 months at Firebase Susan, he's never fired it outside the range. His job description involves eggs, not enemies, powdered milk, not patrols. But somewhere between the firebase and the forward landing zone where he was supposed to deliver hot rations, everything changed. His convoy hit an ambush. The driver panicked. Castellaniano tumbled from the lurching supply truck into elephant grass taller than a man. By the time he got his bearings, the convoy was gone, racing back toward base through a hail of automatic weapons fire. What Castellaniano doesn't know is that he's just stumbled onto Firebase Echo, the largest North Vietnamese ammunition depot in the Central Highlands. What he doesn't know is that this bunker complex contains an estimated 43 tons of Chinese-manufactured ammunition, enough to supply 3 enemy regiments for 6 months of sustained operations. What he doesn't know is that somewhere in those camouflage bunkers are the rockets that killed 4 Americans at Firebase Kate just 2 days ago. And what he absolutely doesn't know is that his accidental discovery is about to trigger the largest airstrike in Third Corps history and save an estimated 300 American lives. According to declassified MACV intelligence reports, enemy ammunition caches in the Central Highlands supplied approximately 60% of NVA operations throughout the 1968 Tet Offensive. Before we move deeper into Castellaniano's jungle ordeal, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe for more untold war stories. Jimmy Castellaniano's mind raced as the rain soaked through his uniform and dripped into his eyes. The jungle seemed alive, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig magnified by fear. He had never been trained for this. He wasn't a soldier, he was a cook. And yet, here he was, separated from his unit, staring at a fortified enemy position with dozens of armed soldiers moving freely just 50 meters away. Each breath felt heavy, each heartbeat thundered in his ears. He recalled the convoy's chaos, the ambush that sent trucks skidding off the muddy trail, men shouting, weapons firing. He had instinctively rolled into the tall elephant grass, unseen, blending with the jungle like a shadow. But hiding was not enough. He needed to survive, and he needed to think fast. Jimmy's eyes darted around, scanning for escape routes. Waterlogged trails led back toward the firebase, but the bullets from the ambush still echoed in his memory. Ahead, the bunker complex loomed large, camouflaged with tarps and branches. He had to remain motionless, every muscle tense, every nerve screaming to move, yet knowing one wrong step could spell death. As he crouched behind the moss-covered log, memories of basic training, just enough to know how to handle a rifle, flickered through his mind. He remembered the drill instructors emphasizing patience, observation, and stealth. This was the moment those lessons mattered. He checked the M16 again, fumbling slightly with the unfamiliar rifle. 3 rounds loaded. It wasn't much, but it was something. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. The monsoon beat down relentlessly, drenching him to the skin. Insects crawled over his face, snakes slithered through the foliage, and yet he remained still. Every now and then, a Viet Cong soldier would glance around, laugh, or bark orders, but none seemed to notice the lone American lurking just beyond their line of sight. Jimmy realized the enormity of what he had stumbled upon. This wasn't just a small supply cache, this was a major ammunition depot, the lifeblood of enemy operations in the Central Highlands. Rockets, rifles, and artillery shells were being stockpiled, enough to sustain enemy regiments for months. And while he was just a cook, he held the knowledge that could prevent countless deaths among his fellow soldiers. Yet fear still gnawed at him. He was a boy in an unfamiliar jungle, alone, with enemy troops mere yards away. Every step had to be calculated, every sound controlled. One misstep and his accidental heroism would end in tragedy. As he adjusted his position behind the log, he noticed a narrow drainage channel cutting through the undergrowth, a possible escape route. He also noticed how the terrain could provide cover if he moved slowly, keeping low and timing his movements between the patrols. Survival now depended on observation, improvisation, and courage he didn't know he possessed. Jimmy took a deep breath, steeling himself for the treacherous journey back to friendly lines. Every decision from this moment onward would determine whether he could alert his unit and change the course of the fighting in the Central Highlands. Before moving deeper into the jungle with him, take a moment to comment below where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe for more gripping and untold war stories. Jimmy Castellaniano inched through the jungle, each step careful, deliberate. Mud clung to his boots, sap to his fingers, and the relentless monsoon blurred the line between ground and sky. He knew the enemy was close, the sounds of footsteps and muffled voices echoing through the thick can. Opie above. The weight of the M16 in his hands was unfamiliar, but he held it like a lifeline. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to move with precision, each motion calculated to avoid snapping a twig or disturbing a leaf. As he progressed, the enormity of his discovery pressed down on him. Firebase Echo was no ordinary supply depot, it was massive. The crates he had glimpsed earlier held artillery shells, rifles, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. Every piece represented a direct threat to his fellow soldiers at Firebase Susan, some of whom were still in danger from previous attacks. Jimmy realized that reporting this intel could save hundreds of lives, yet he also understood the peril of returning through enemy territory. One wrong step could end his story here in the shadows of the jungle. The rain worsened, transforming the forest floor into a slick, treacherous mess. Roots snaked across his path, threatening to trip him at every step. Mosquitoes swarmed, the air heavy with humidity and the acrid smell of decaying vegetation. Yet Jimmy pressed forward, silently whispering encouragement to himself. He remembered tales of soldiers who had survived far worse odds, and he drew strength from the thought that even a cook could rise to extraordinary circumstances. Hours passed as he maneuvered through dense undergrowth, relying on instinct and memory of the patrol patterns he had observed. He crawled under low-hanging branches, rolled over muddy patches, and paused frequently to ensure the enemy had not noticed his absence. The jungle was both a shield and a trap, hiding him from prying eyes but masking every potential hazard. At one point, he stumbled upon a small stream, its waters carrying debris from upstream. It provided a brief reprieve and a source of hydration, but it also posed a risk. The sound could give away his position. He knelt, cupped his hands, and drank sparingly, the icy water a shock against his exhaustion. He glanced toward the bunker again, just a faint outline through the mist, realizing the enemy might return at any moment. Jimmy's mind raced with scenarios. Should he circle back the way he came, risking detection by returning through open patches, or forge a new path through unfamiliar terrain? Each option carried risks, each choice had consequences. His determination hardened. He would make it back, and he would deliver the information. Lives depended on it. Finally, he spotted a narrow animal trail cutting through the jungle. It was faint, but offered the best chance for concealment. He adjusted the rifle, took a steadying breath, and began moving along it, every step a test of endurance, courage, and wit. The monsoon continued to pour, the jungle a relentless adversary, but Jimmy felt a sense of grim purpose. Before we move on to see how his journey unfolds, take a moment to comment below where you are watching from and subscribe for more untold war stories from the front lines. The narrow trail carved by some long-forgotten animal led Jimmy deeper into the heart of the Central Highlands. Every step was a battle against the jungle itself. Branches tore at his uniform, mud sucked at his boots, and insects swarmed relentlessly, drawn to the warmth of his exhausted body. The monsoon showed no mercy, turning the forest floor into a slick obstacle course. Each misstep could mean a twisted ankle, a fall, or worse, discovery by the enemy patrols he had narrowly avoided so far. As he pressed forward, he thought back to the men at Firebase Susan, still unaware of the immense threat hidden in the bunkers he had spotted. The more he considered it, the heavier the responsibility felt. He wasn't trained for reconnaissance nor for combat. He was a cook. Yet here he was, carrying the knowledge of an ammunition depot that could supply 3 enemy regiments for months. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about lives that would be lost or saved depending on his actions. Jimmy paused, pressing his back against a large tree, listening intently. Through the jungle's cacophony, the constant drumming of rain, the distant calls of birds, the occasional crack of breaking branches. He thought he heard movement, human movement. Instinctively, he flattened against the tree, rifle at the ready. He barely dared to breathe, each exhale a potential giveaway. 30 yards away, the shadows of Viet Cong soldiers slipped through the mist. They were returning to the bunkers, unaware of the lone American watching them. Time became elastic in the jungle. Minutes stretched endlessly as Jimmy waited, calculating his next move. He knew he couldn't stay in one place for long. Every hour wasted increased the chance that the enemy would discover his presence, or that another patrol might stumble upon him. He studied the terrain, memorizing landmarks, fallen logs, and distinct tree formations that would guide him back to friendly lines. He repeated these mental notes like a mantra, hoping that the information would remain intact under the stress of exhaustion. Eventually, Jimmy decided it was time to move. He shifted carefully, taking a low, crouched path along the muddy trail. Each footfall was deliberate, each motion designed to avoid alerting anyone. The closer he got to the edge of the depot, the higher the stakes became. He could hear voices now, nearer than before, ordering crates to be stacked, doors to be locked, the mechanical clatter of heavy ammunition shifting inside the bunkers. His stomach churned with both fear and adrenaline. At one point, a Viet Cong soldier paused near his hiding spot, inspecting the jungle for threats. Jimmy froze, body pressed to the ground, rain dripping from his hair into his eyes. The soldier muttered something under his breath, stepped over a root, and moved on. Jimmy exhaled silently, relief flooding through him, but there was no time to dwell. He had to get back, and he had to get back with information that could change the course of the Tet offensive in the Central Highlands. As he began retracing his path, Jimmy's mind alternated between fear and purpose. He imagined the lives that could be saved, the comrades who might return safely to their families because of the intel he carried. He adjusted the rifle, steadied his shaking hands, and silently vowed to see this mission through. Before we move to see how Jimmy's daring journey starts to take shape, leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe for more untold war stories from history. Jimmy moved cautiously, aware that the jungle itself was both an ally and an enemy. Vines and roots offered concealment, but they also threatened to trip him. Every step required balance, control, and nerves of steel. The monsoon pounded relentlessly, washing the earth into a slippery mess, and the persistent drizzle blurred his vision, making every shadow seem like a potential threat. Sweat mixed with rain, stinging his eyes, but he forced himself forward. Survival demanded focus. Panic could be fatal. As he navigated the undergrowth, he thought more about Firebase Echo. The scale of what he had discovered was staggering. The crates, carefully camouflaged beneath the dense canopy, contained rockets, artillery shells, rifles, and tons of ammunition. One mistake from the Viet Cong, one overlooked detail, and an airstrike could have hit friendly positions. But Jimmy knew that without the right information, the supplies would continue to flow into enemy hands, extending the fight and costing countless American lives. Jimmy paused near a fallen tree, listening intently. Voices and laughter drifted through the rain-soaked jungle. Viet Cong soldiers moved about, unaware that their carefully guarded depot had been observed by a single, exhausted, 19-year-old cook. He had no formal reconnaissance training, no support team, just wits, determination, and the knowledge that he was holding a key piece of intelligence that could turn the tide. He felt a surge of responsibility and fear simultaneously. He adjusted the rifle in his hands and considered his options. Returning to Firebase Susan meant retracing his path through treacherous terrain while avoiding enemy patrols. But Jimmy also recognized the risk of taking a longer, less obvious route. It might be safer, but it could consume valuable time. Every moment delayed the warning to command, increased the danger to hundreds of soldiers on the front lines. The choice was clear: move fast, stay hidden, and trust his instincts. The jungle seemed endless, a maze of towering trees, tangled roots, and dense undergrowth. Occasionally, the mist lifted, revealing glimpses of enemy soldiers carrying crates, checking barricades, or talking in hushed tones. Jimmy memorized every detail: the layout of the depot, the number of men on patrol, and the positions of supply crates. He knew that when he finally reported back, these details could make the difference between a successful strike and a missed opportunity. Hours stretched into what felt like days. Jimmy crawled through mud, slipped across streams, and used the jungle's natural cover to shield his progress. At one point, a heavy branch cracked under his weight. A nearby soldier glanced in his direction but didn't investigate. Relief washed over him, but he pressed on, understanding that luck was a fragile ally in the unforgiving environment of war. Eventually, Jimmy glimpsed a narrow ridge leading toward friendly lines. The path was exposed, a precarious final stretch, but it was the quickest route. He steeled himself, took a deep breath, and moved forward, muscles tensed, senses alert to every sound, smell, and movement. Survival and mission success depended on discipline, courage, and the sharpness of a mind trained by necessity rather than experience. Before we continue to see how Jimmy navigates the most dangerous part of his journey, comment below where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more untold war stories from history. The ridge loomed ahead, slick with rain and lined with exposed rocks that offered little cover. Jimmy's heart pounded in his chest as he assessed the final stretch toward safety. Each step required extreme care. A single misstep could send him sliding into enemy sight lines or alert nearby patrols. The jungle, which had shielded him for hours, now felt like a trap. Jimmy's mind raced as he recalled every detail of Firebase Echo. The enormity of the enemy stockpile weighed on him, not just in pounds of ammunition, but in the lives it represented. He thought of the soldiers at Firebase Susan, the ones who had laughed and joked over meals, unaware of the looming threat. He had stumbled into a role no 19-year-old was prepared for. The carrier of intelligence capable of saving hundreds of lives. The gravity of the responsibility gave him a mix of fear and resolve. Moving cautiously along the ridge, he paused to study the terrain. He noted the positions of large boulders, fallen branches, and clusters of dense foliage. Each feature could serve as cover or as a hazard depending on how the enemy patrolled the area. He forced himself to breathe slowly, conserving energy, while maintaining focus on the subtle sounds of approaching soldiers. Every distant footstep or snapped twig sent adrenaline surging through his veins, sharpening his senses. Suddenly, movement to his left caught his eye. A Viet Cong soldier emerged from the mist, carrying a crate of ammunition back to the bunker. Jimmy froze, pressing against the slope of the ridge. Time seemed to slow. The soldier paused, glanced in his direction, and muttered something before moving on. Jimmy exhaled slowly, relief mingled with the realization that any moment could bring disaster. He adjusted his grip on the M16, a tool he had once considered foreign but now trusted as a lifeline. He pressed forward, descending into a narrow valley where the jungle canopy thinned, offering fleeting glimpses of the sky. The rain continued to pour, masking his movements but making footing treacherous. Water pooled in depressions and slicked over roots, threatening to betray his position with a sudden splash. He focused on precise, deliberate movements, keeping his body low and silent. Jimmy thought of the strategy he would need once he reached friendly lines. He couldn't simply deliver the information verbally, he would need to convey the precise layout of the depot, the number of enemy soldiers, and the location of key ammunition caches. Every detail mattered. The success of the upcoming airstrike, and the lives it could save, depended on the clarity and accuracy of his observations. Hours of tense crawling, slipping, and ducking eventually brought him closer to the outer perimeter of the American forward position. He could hear distant voices of his own troops, the sounds of vehicles moving along muddy tracks, and the faint hum of radios coordinating operations. Each sound was a beacon of hope, proof that he was nearly through the deadliest stretch of his journey. The last 100 meters tested him more than any previous obstacle. The ground was uneven, and enemy patrols were still active nearby. Jimmy slowed his pace, scanning constantly, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to react. He knew that one false move could turn the hours of careful maneuvering into a catastrophe. At last, he glimpsed the familiar markings of Firebase Susan. Relief surged through him, but he forced himself to remain vigilant. The mission was not yet complete. He had reached the edge of safety, but the critical task of relaying the intelligence remained. Every second counted. The fate of hundreds of American soldiers depended on him. Jimmy emerged from the dense jungle onto a narrow dirt path that led toward the firebase. The rain had eased slightly, leaving a heavy mist that clung to the trees and draped over the ground like a wet blanket. His clothes were soaked, his boots filled with mud, and his body ached from hours of crawling, slipping, and clinging to roots and branches. Every muscle screamed in protest, yet he forced himself onward. The knowledge of what he carried, the intelligence about Firebase Echo, pushed him forward. The closer he got to friendly territory, the more aware he became of the danger. Enemy patrols could still be in the area. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, every sudden splash of water could signal discovery. Jimmy moved deliberately, using every technique he had learned instinctively, timing his movements with the sound of wind through the trees, keeping low and constantly scanning for signs of soldiers. He recalled the layout of the ammunition depot with startling clarity. Crates stacked with precision, tunnels dug into the earth for concealment, and the meticulous organization of rockets and artillery shells. All of it would make the difference for the airstrike. He repeated the details in his mind like a mantra, knowing that forgetting even a single detail could cost lives. A sudden sound broke the rhythm of the jungle, voices approaching from the opposite direction. Jimmy froze, pressing himself against a mossy over tree. Two enemy soldiers passed by the path, rifles slung, their boots squishing in the mud. Jimmy held his breath as the soldiers lingered, seemingly sensing nothing. The minutes stretched, each second a test of endurance. Then, finally, they moved on, disappearing into the mist. Every step now was a balance between speed and caution. The firebase was close, yet still far enough that exhaustion and fear could betray him. As he crept through the undergrowth, he thought about the soldiers relying on him. The men at Firebase Susan, oblivious to the massive depot just a few miles away, depended on his success. Every ton of ammunition captured, or destroyed, meant lives saved. Eventually, Jimmy reached a clearing where he could see the outskirts of the firebase. A small team of guards patrolled the perimeter, and he timed his movements carefully, using the cover of low walls and supply crates. He approached slowly, staying just out of sight until he found an officer he recognized. The familiar face brought a flicker of relief, but Jimmy knew his mission wasn't over. He needed to communicate everything accurately and quickly. He took a deep breath and moved into the open, showing the officer the markings he had memorized and the positions of the enemy patrols. The officer's eyes widened as Jimmy described the size and scope of the depot, the quantity of ammunition, and the potential consequences if it remained untouched. Jimmy's heart pounded as the officer immediately began mobilizing the command structure to relay the intelligence. Every second now was crucial. The information would be transmitted, and preparations for an airstrike would begin. Jimmy felt a mix of pride, relief, and lingering fear. He had navigated through enemy territory, unseen, unarmed in many ways, and survived against impossible odds. But the work wasn't done. The airstrike, precision, and Timmy. NG would determine whether the lives of hundreds of soldiers were saved. As he stepped back to watch the officers coordinate their plans, Jimmy realized the magnitude of what he had achieved. He was just 19 years old, a cook, thrown into the chaos of war, yet he had changed the course of operations in the Central Highlands. One young man's accidental discovery, guided by instinct and courage, had the potential to alter the lives of hundreds. The preparations for the airstrike began almost immediately. Radios crackled with urgent messages, officers shouting coordinates, aircraft numbers, and ordnance requirements. Jimmy stood quietly, exhausted but alert, as trained pilots and commanders worked to convert his first-hand observations into actionable plans. Every detail he had memorized about the depot, the crates, the tunnels, the surrounding terrain, was critical. A single miscommunication could result in friendly fire or a failed mission. In the control center, maps were spread across tables, covered with chalk markings and notes. Jimmy pointed to specific areas, indicating entrances, storage locations, and patrol patterns. The officers took notes rapidly, asking clarifying questions and double-checking distances. The scale of the depot was becoming clear even to those who had previously underestimated its importance. It was immense. Thousands of tons of ammunition, rockets, and artillery shells, carefully hidden beneath layers of camouflage and reinforced earth. Outside, the first wave of aircraft began taxiing onto the airstrips. A mix of fighter bombers and medium bombers were loaded with explosives designed to incapacitate the depot while minimizing collateral damage to nearby villages. The pilots had briefed before, but this mission was different. They were relying not just on intelligence reports, but on the eyes of a 19-year-old cook who had stumbled into the heart of the enemy's operation. Jimmy's stomach twisted as he watched the planes take off, engines roaring and lifting into the rain-soaked skies. He knew that every second counted. The enemy could discover his intrusion at any moment, and the depot was still fully manned. At the same time, he felt a surge of pride. His accidental discovery had turned into a decisive contribution to the war effort. It was a strange feeling for someone whose primary experience in Vietnam had been cooking meals for soldiers. The first bombs fell with a deafening roar, shaking the ground and sending plumes of smoke and fire into the air. Jimmy watched as explosions tore through the carefully stacked crates, igniting ammunition and triggering secondary blasts. The depot erupted in a chain reaction of fire and destruction. The precision of the strike was astonishing, a combination of meticulous planning and his detailed observations. As the explosions continued, he realized the broader impact. This was not just about destroying supplies. It was about disrupting the enemy's operational capabilities for months. Rockets that had killed Americans at Firebase Echo were gone. Artillery shells that could have targeted multiple bases were destroyed. and the supply line for several regiments was shattered. Hundreds of soldiers' lives had been spared, and the strategic advantage in the Central Highlands had shifted in favor of the United States. Smoke and debris filled the valley below, and the heat of the fires could be felt even from Jimmy's position. Pilots reported back, confirming targets destroyed and enemy forces neutralized. The mission's success was undeniable, and a wave of relief swept through the command center. Jimmy slumped against a wall, exhausted, wet, and shaken by the magnitude of what he had witnessed and helped orchestrate. In the aftermath, the significance of his accidental discovery became clear to everyone. Jimmy, the 19-year-old mess hall cook, had changed the course of operations in the Central Highlands. The intelligence he gathered had enabled an unprecedented airstrike, saved hundreds of lives, and prevented a major tactical advantage from slipping into enemy hands. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe. The jungle was no longer a threat, and the depot that had loomed so large in his mind was reduced to smoldering ruins. He understood that, by accident or by courage, he had become part of a story that would be remembered as one of the most remarkable instances of individual impact during the Vietnam War. The morning after the airstrike, the jungle was eerily silent. Smoke still curled into the sky from the smoldering ruins of Firebase Echo, and the faint smell of burning gunpowder lingered on the damp air. Jimmy moved cautiously, guided by the soft light of dawn filtering through the dense canopy. Every footstep was deliberate. The danger might have passed, but the jungle remained unpredictable, hiding potential threats beneath its green expanse. He thought about the chaos he had witnessed just hours earlier. The bombs had struck with devastating precision, flattening supply huts, scattering ammunition crates, and leaving secondary explosions that rocked the valley. It was hard to believe that a single young cook could have played such a pivotal role in orchestrating it. Yet every officer and pilot had acknowledged his critical observations. The accuracy of the strike, and the lives it had saved, was a direct result of Jimmy's courage and quick thinking. As he approached a familiar trail leading back toward Firebase Susan, he noticed the first signs of recovery. American medics moved cautiously along the paths, attending to minor injuries and checking equipment left abandoned during the chaos. Soldiers emerged from temporary shelters, blinking in the sunlight, many of them unaware of the danger that had been neutralized just hours before. Some would never know who had prevented a catastrophe. Jimmy allowed himself a small, private sense of satisfaction, but the relief was tempered by a sobering realization: the NVA would not stay idle for long. They had lost a massive stockpile of ammunition, yes, but they were adaptive, experienced, and determined. Any intelligence gleaned from Jimmy's accidental discovery could be replaced if the enemy reorganized. The war was far from over. Jimmy's return to the firebase brought him face to face with his commanding officer. The officer's expression, a mixture of disbelief and admiration, spoke volumes. Jimmy reported the location of the depot one final time, clarifying minor details and offering insights that could inform future patrols. Every word reinforced the significance of what he had accomplished. As he handed over the final report, Jimmy's mind drifted to the broader implications. This one, accidental discovery, had not only saved hundreds of lives, but it also demonstrated the critical importance of observation, initiative, and courage in the field. The ordinary had collided with the extraordinary, and in that collision, history had been shaped. Word of Jimmy's contribution spread quietly among the ranks. Soldiers recounted the tale in hushed tones, embellishing certain details but never losing sight of the essential truth. A 19-year-old cook, thrown into the chaos of war, had altered the course of events. He had become a symbol of how even the most unexpected individuals could influence the outcome of large-scale operations. The smoke began to clear, revealing the damaged landscape and shattered bunkers. Jimmy paused for a moment, looking at the scale of destruction he had indirectly orchestrated. He felt a deep, unspoken connection to every soldier who would benefit from the strike, every life spared because of his actions. It was a feeling that would remain with him long after he returned home. The story of Firebase Echo would be recorded in declassified intelligence reports, tactical analyses, and personal recollections, but few would know the full truth behind it. A young cook, lost in the jungle, had acted with instinct, bravery, and quick thinking. He had stumbled into history and changed the fate of hundreds of soldiers in the process. By mid-afternoon, Jimmy finally returned to Firebase Susan, exhausted, soaked, and shaken from the ordeal. The once overwhelming jungle now seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but the memory of the previous hours, the explosions, the smoke, the hidden depot, remained vivid in his mind. The weight of what he had experienced pressed heavily on his shoulders. Officers and fellow soldiers received him with a mixture of curiosity and cautious admiration. Questions flew fast and urgent, each one seeking clarity on the location of the depot, the scale of the stockpile, and the risks he had taken. Jimmy recounted every detail meticulously, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He described the bunkers, the camouflage, the careful organization of the ammunition, and the enemy patrols. Every piece of information mattered. Every detail could save lives. In the command center, reports from the airstrike filtered in. The destruction was near total. Crates of Chinese-manufactured ammunition lay scattered and burning. Rockets, artillery shells, and rifles, supplies meant to devastate American forces, were obliterated before they could be used. Jimmy's accidental discovery had prevented untold casualties and shifted the tactical balance in the Central Highlands. For Jimmy, a 19-year-old cook with no combat experience, the enormity of his actions was overwhelming. He had never imagined that a misstep off a supply convoy could lead to an event with such far-reaching consequences. Yet, through instinct, courage, and quick thinking, he had directly influenced the outcome of a critical military operation. As the day waned, Jimmy allowed himself a moment of reflection. The jungle around him, once threatening and impenetrable, now stood as a silent witness to his bravery. He had stumbled into history, acted decisively, and emerged as an unlikely hero. In the chaos of war, even the smallest individuals could leave an indelible mark, and Jimmy Castellaniano had done just that.